decided
I'm
on
gonna go
new
ahead and finish putting
elections.
this one back together.
It was a fatal decision. In the 1930 elections for the Reichstag, the Nazis won 18.3% of the vote and became the second largest party. More and more people saw in Hitler what he saw in himself, the savior of Germany. Support for his party grew. The middle classes were drawn to him through fear of communism and his vision of a strong Germany. The party of the right, led by Alfred Hugenberg, wanted to annex Hitler's popularity for themselves, and a joint rally was organized at Bad Harzburg in autumn 1931. It misfired, and Hitler used it for his own aggrandizement. He was not prepared to compromise. He wanted power, but on his terms and for himself alone. He was not beholden to business for funds. He was not open to negotiation. In court cases involving his supporters, this was the line he always followed: change by constitutional means. The lawyer Hans Frank, who later became Governor General of occupied Polish territories, was always at hand to help Hitler. Hitler also took out German citizenship to enable him to become a candidate for the presidency.
The sleepy boo's feet back together. Oh, not that one. This one. It cracked completely.
In 1932,
Before I even
propaganda
touched it,
seven towns, which he visited by air over
been
7
damaged
days.
before.
That
When I
year
was
there
taking
were
off
5
the little
elections.
muffs, I found it in
Hitler
there,
used
so
all the means
that had nothing to do with me. It was just already like that.
And with no other
From
party able to promulgate
wearing
a stronger
stuff before.
vision of Germany's future as
So
Hitler,
glued that back
he was
together, so
becoming
that's good now.
unstoppable. That year, his image seemed to be omnipresent and his speeches eagerly listened to.
And a message who I thought was the owner of these two 98 Furbies, and I was incorrect. I messaged the person that's the owner of the 2005 Sleepy Blue, so
that he was one of the people.
I went,
He
oh,
had been
oops,
through
wrong
the
one.
hardships himself, and because of that, the future was going to be different. How different was already plain to anyone who wanted to listen.
But I should be able to get these out
Always
soon.
returning to the people as the
I
linchpin
think
of
Amelia's
society,
going to take
he
a little
offered
bit
a
longer.
world free of class.
Amelia's Furby's going to take a little bit longer,
Kurt
but
von Schleicher inadvertently helped Hitler on his way to power.
those are back
He bore a
together.
large part of the responsibility for bringing down the Brüning chancellorship. And when his successor, Franz von Papen of the Centre Party, was forced to resign, Schleicher was appointed chancellor, having formed a close relationship with President Hindenburg. But his willingness to work with the socialist parties annoyed Hindenburg. Papen, still seeking power, held secret meetings with Hitler and Hindenburg, and the president refused Schleicher's request for emergency powers and dismissed him. For advocating a return to the monarchy of the Hohenzollern family, Schleicher had become a target for assassination in
Take the
Hitler's eyes,
faceplate screws
and he had
off.
Schleicher shot and murdered, together with his wife, during the Night of the Long Knives on the 30th of June 1934. The government could do nothing to prevent the wave of sympathy for Hitler, as discontent on the streets was countered by the police. Authority waned, Hitler and his cohorts waited for their chance.
Okay, these are really tricky to get out. Get this one first, I missed it. Alright. So that one. Oh. Whoa, nutty. Oh. The Sleepy's got damaged. So let's go ahead and glue that back together.
Sie verwechseln uns mit ihresgleichen selbst. Wir haben ein Ziel uns gewählt und verfechten es Vernages und rücksichtslos bis ins Grab hinein.
Just now, at the moment they were poised for power, President Hindenburg rejected Hitler's demand for the chancellorship, and there were rumblings of discontent in the party hierarchy. And as Hitler never cared to be restricted by finances, the party was in debt. But the turnaround was swift. Businessmen paid off the party's debts, and following the election of November the 6th, 1932, in which the National Socialists lost seats, Franz von Papen had persuaded President Hindenburg that Hitler could be controlled in government and should be given the chancellorship. The National Socialists had 3 ministerial posts, the Conservatives 8. It was a fatal decision that brought about the collapse of the Weimar Republic and the end of democracy. The Machtergreifung, the seizure of power, was complete. On the 30th of January 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. His supporters celebrated on the streets. Germany felt that change was coming. There was not long to wait. As a triumphant Hitler and a failing Hindenburg showed themselves to the crowds, the SA were already attacking their enemies. Here, Hitler attends a funeral for an SA man who died during the fighting during that first night. As usual, death was more interesting to Hitler and his cause than life.
Where's the other one? Okay, let's try this one, see if we can get better than this.
Der Kamerad seiner Kameraden, der Führer seiner Gemeinschaft. Wie all die anderen, die Hunderttausende, jeder vorbei.
Ludendorff was horrified by Hitler's rise to power. A telegram that he was reported to have sent to Hindenburg read, "By appointing Hitler Chancellor of the Reich, you have handed over our sacred German fatherland to one of the greatest demagogues of all time. I prophesy to you, this evil man will plunge our Reich into the abyss
like a
and will inflict immeasurable woe on our nation.
I'm not a fan
Future
of it.
generations will curse you in your grave for this action." Hitler, always with one eye on the propaganda potential of the old general, later tried bribery to win him over and was sent away empty-handed by an enraged Ludendorff. Within a week, there was a clampdown on the opposition parties with left-wing meetings banned. Even moderates were assaulted and threatened. By mid-February, the Communist Party had been suppressed and members of the Reichstag arrested. Hitler's first speech as Chancellor was given on February the 10th.
Dude, this hurt my fingers, my hand. Jeez Louise.
Am 30. Januar dieses Jahres wurde die neue Regierung der Nationalen Nation gebildet. Ich und damit die
I gotta figure out where I put the other bits because this is ridiculous.
in die ein. Ich glaube, dass nun wir die Voraussetzungen erreicht sind und die das vergangene Jahr erkämpft haben. Wir wollen nicht lügen, wollen nicht spinnen. Ich habe
Dude, this freaking hurts.
Liegt die Zukunft des deutschen Volkes. Wenn wir selbst dieses deutsche Volk ein Vorführung zu eigener Arbeit, zu eigenen Entschlossenheit, eigenen Trotz, eigenen Beharrlichkeit, dann werden wir wieder den Vorstein, genau wie Fähigkeit aus Deutschland nicht gestellt dahin, sondern fest in Klappen. Deutsches Volk, viele Jahre. Und ich werde hier, so wie wir und so wie ich, in dieses Amt eintrat, so will ich aufgehen. Ich sage es nicht um Gehalt und nicht um Lohn. Ich sage es um deiner Welt wegen.
On the 27th of February, the Reichstag went up in flames, with the blaze destroying the Great Hall, and the Nazis had the excuse they needed for the first stage in the crushing of the democratic state. The communists were blamed for the fire. A Dutchman, Marinus van der Lubbe, was arrested for arson and found guilty at his trial and executed by guillotine the following year. 3 others accused with him were acquitted. One of those was Georgy Dimitrov, a Bulgarian who calmly told the court that Goering and the Nazis had been behind the fire. After the fire, Goering was reported to have boasted that he had arranged the arson attack, and later confessed that he had drawn up a list of those to be arrested even before the fire took place. After the fire, other communists were arrested and murdered, and constitutional rights suspended under the Reichstag fire decree. Under its terms, personal freedoms were suspended, house searches and seizure of property made legal. Within 2 weeks, some 10,000 arrests had taken place in Prussia alone. This was martial law in all but name. Ernst Thälmann, leader of the Communist Party, was one of those arrested. Thälmann, after 11 years of solitary confinement, was taken to Buchenwald, where, in 1944, Hitler gave the order for him to be shot. The last hurdle for Hitler was the forthcoming election of March the 5th, 1933. The brown shirts were on the streets to intimidate the voters, and state radio ordered to broadcast Hitler's speech from Königsberg. 50,000 members of the SS, SA and Stahlhelm were sent to monitor the voting in Prussia. The results were disappointing. 43.9% of the votes went to Hitler, 17 million people. This meant that the Papen-Hitler coalition had just a 16-seat majority. On the 21st of March 1933, the new Reichstag met in Potsdam at the Garrison Church, where Frederick the Great was buried. Hindenburg also attended, unaware, as were most onlookers, of what was really happening. A relic from a bygone age, he lent to Hitler the aura of the great German heroes from the past. It was a soothing sight to those who were tired of the struggles. The SA and army marched along the same route, symbolic of the old and new regimes. But no socialist or communist parliamentarians were invited. The worst of the nightmare had not even begun.
Kann dessen Zukunft meistern. Wenn ihr an eurem täglichen Wirkungskreis rückblickend wieder einmal des heutigen Tages gedenkt, erinnert euch dieser meiner Meinung. In diesem Willen lasst uns zusammenrufen. Deutschland, unser geliebtes Vaterland. und Mädchen und der Reichspräsident ihrer Wetterscheid von Hindemann und
Next day, trade union offices were stormed. The terror had been unleashed. On March the 23rd, Hitler was speaking to the Reichstag to push through a piece of legislation that would lay another stone on the path to his dictatorship. This was the Enabling Act, which would give the cabinet, and therefore Hitler himself, authority to enact laws without referring to the Reichstag parliament. To make sure that Hitler got his way, the SS and SA surrounded the Kroll Opera House, which was where the Reichstag was now meeting. Goering, who was president of the Reichstag, ruled that any absent deputy would be considered as present. In this way, he ensured the presence of 2/3 of the total number of members that was required for the vote, and it was impossible for socialist SPD members to boycott the proceedings as planned. Whilst Hitler was still trying to keep the image of adhering to the constitutional rules upright, his SA men under Röhm were simply deposing the state governments and occupying buildings as they did in Munich on the 9th of March. Hitler had finally been able to exact his revenge for the failed coup of 1923. The Gleichschaltung, the coordination of all aspects of German life so that tight control could be exercised over every citizen, was not only seen in the laws being swiftly enacted, but in the organizations such as the World War I veterans' Stahlhelm, steel helmet, which was integrated into the SA and finally dissolved in 1935. The unions were crushed in May, when leaders were imprisoned and the unions merged with the German Workers' Front, which all workers were forced to join. As yet, the Jews were unharmed, but on April the 1st, 1933, Jewish doctors, lawyers, and businesses were subjected to an official boycott. Then, on May the 10th, as bonfire flames curled around the books of Thomas Mann, Sigmund Freud, and many others in every town that had a university, Goebbels spoke in Berlin.
Diese mitternächtige Stunde, den Ungeist der Vergangenheit, den Flammen anzuvertrauen.
It would only be a matter of time before other fires would burn. There where they burn books, said the 19th century German Jewish writer Heinrich Heine, human beings will finally burn too. Einstein, theatre director Max Reinhardt, Thomas Mann, and many others who understood what the Nazis intended, emigrated. Germany was left in the stranglehold of the barbarians.
Yeah, whatever. And we should be able to just do it from there. Oh, I just lost one. Dang, dude. What the heck, dude?
Unsere Partei gerade diesen Hof war, sprach sie schon weiter auf. Erstens, sie wollten eine wahrhaftige
You know this is broken too. Like the whole freaking stomach is broken. Oh my. I'm not repairing that, that's too much. That's too much wood plastic pieces.
Dass dieser Staat und dieses Reich bestehen soll in den kommenden Jahrtausenden. Wir können glücklich sein zu wissen, dass diese Zukunft rechtlos uns gehört.
Okay, that one came out. How come you won't?
Es lebe die nationalsozialistische Bewegung! Es lebe Deutschland!
Why? Why do you not? Come.
Amongst the books that the Nazis burned in 1933 were the works of Heinrich Heine, the German Jewish 19th century poet who wrote, "When you hear a crashing such as never before has been heard in the world's history, then you know that the German thunderbolt has fallen at last. At that uproar, the eagles of the air will drop dead, and lions in the remotest deserts of Africa will hide in their royal dens. A play will be performed in Germany, which will make the French Revolution look like an innocent idyll." The first concentration camps were erected in spring 1933. With 5 million unemployed, Hitler knew that he had to contain the growing depth of restlessness. He began a program of public works, tirelessly touring the country, laying foundation stones and engendering enthusiasm for himself and his policies with every mile of autobahn that was built. Life in Germany was improving, and Hitler was the man responsible. Yet he was not clear of his problems. The army and the SA under Röhm were competing for power for their own organizations. Röhm wanted to see himself as head of a single German defense force and disband the official German armed forces, the Reichswehr. He wanted the Nazis to seize power by force, whereas Hitler was determined to erode democracy from inside its defenses. Hitler found himself standing against the SA, whose tendency for street violence aggravated him. The situation worsened as Röhm's belligerence grew. In this film, Hitler has arrived at an SA meeting flanked by his personal guards, the SS. It was a show of power that Röhm would have done well to take heed of. Yet the speech is heavy with praise for the SA members. Hitler needed them to remain on his side. Not so the SA leadership. For them, the end was in sight. By the end of June 1934, Röhm had overplayed his hand. He wanted to be Minister of Defense and demanded that the Reichswehr and its professional officers, that he saw as lacking in revolutionary spirit, be assimilated into the SA, which now contained almost 3 million members. Hitler feared a coup attempt from his old street-fighting comrade. When Röhm presented the Minister for Defense, Werner von Blomberg, with a memorandum demanding the SA become the nation's armed force, Hindenburg threatened to impose martial law if Hitler did not act. Hitler was only too pleased to act. From the 30th of June until July the 2nd, Hitler sent out his SS and Gestapo on assassination missions, and Röhm and many of his SA comrades were summarily executed. Hitler didn't stop there. Von Papen was arrested. Schleicher and even leaders of other conservative parties were executed, as were many who had voiced opposition to the Nazis. Gustav Kahr, who had opposed Hitler's 1923 putsch attempt, paid now for that decision with his life as the SS hacked him to death. This was the night of the long knives. It enhanced the Gestapo's reputation for terror and left no one in any doubt that the same fate awaited anyone who dared to cross the Nazi leader. Gregor Strasser, one-time Nazi member, was put under arrest by Hitler, who personally gave the order for his murder. Strasser was assassinated by the Gestapo in his cell. Shortly before his death, he had written to a friend, "Whatever happens, mark what I say. From now on, Germany is in the hands of an Austrian who is a congenital liar, a former officer who is a pervert, and a clubfoot. And I tell you the last is the worst of them all. This is Satan in human form." The SS unit, known as Totenkopf, became an independent organization. The now powerless SA gave Hitler a pledge of allegiance.
You've got video right now.
On July the 13th, 1934, Hitler justified the purge in a nationally broadcast Reichstag. "In this hour I was responsible for the fate of the German people, and thereby I became the supreme judge of the German people. I gave the order to shoot the ringleaders in this treason, and I further gave the order to cauterize down to the raw flesh the ulcers of this poisoning of the wells in our domestic life. Let the nation know that its existence, which depends on its internal order and security, cannot be threatened with impunity by anyone. And let it be known for all time to come that if anyone raises his hand to strike the state, then certain death is his lot." Dollfuss, the Austrian dictator, felt the brutal truth of these words when on July the 25th he was assassinated by 8 Austrian Nazis during a coup attempt. Dollfuss had banned the Austrian Nazi Party and formed an alliance with Mussolini against Germany, thus making an enemy of Hitler. When Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August 1934, Hitler knew that his hour had come. Goebbels had arranged the funeral ceremony and cleverly wove the traditions of an imperial past, represented by Hindenburg and the attendant Prussian landed nobility, the Reichswehr and the Nazi SA. Hitler bowed before Hindenburg, as cynical and politically duplicitous as ever. No one stood between him and absolute power. The office of president, Hitler declared, would be merged with his own, and he became Führer and Reichskanzler. Hitler was now a dictator to whom the army, on the orders of Defense Minister von Blomberg, had to swear their oath of allegiance.
What the heck?
Dass ich den Führer des Deutschen Reiches und Volkes, Adolf Hitler, dem Oberbefehlshaber der Wehrmacht, unbedingt
The 5th of September 1934, Hitler attended a rally in Nuremberg, flying into his cheering supporters under the watchful eye of the cameras of Leni Riefenstahl. Goebbels had found one of the most willing foot soldiers for his propaganda war. Hitler was portrayed as godlike, the closest thing to a Roman emperor it was possible to be. For her efforts, Riefenstahl was rewarded with the German Film Prize Gold Medal in 1935. Adolf Hitler needed manual workers, but he needed to have
Hello.
all men trained in military-style formations.
Now,
Anyone who refused to
you woke
participate
up
in
before,
Hitler's
but now.
re-education programs could expect
you
a
act like this
visit by the
now?
SS. In 1944, Hitler had pronounced that the battle between German racial ideas and the Slav masses could no longer be avoided. This would lead to permanent mastery of the world. His aims were clear to anyone who wanted to listen. No one except the Nazis wanted to believe him.
Wir standen nicht im Schützengraben und nicht im Trommelfeuer der Granaten und sind trotzdem Soldaten.
It was the turn of the socialists to be rounded up. The repression continued with renewed vigor. New laws removed German citizenship from all those of Jewish origin. Marriage between non-Jews and Jews was prohibited. Jewish businesses were closed and looted, and Jews were banned from working in the civil service, the arts, or farming. In 1935, Hitler introduced conscription in contravention of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The Western powers did not oppose the move, believing that Germany had a right to maintain armed forces for its own defense. The 100,000 men allowed under the treaty grew to 500,000. But that was just the beginning. Hitler wanted the largest, most efficient armed force in the world for his expansion plans. But he built his army gradually, so that no one would feel they had a real reason to stop him until it was too late. The Saarland in southwest Germany, occupied by France and Britain after World War I, was restored to Germany after a plebiscite in March 1935. This was also the year that Martin Bormann, Hitler's powerful and manipulative private secretary and fixer, bought some land around the Obersalzberg Mountains near Munich, which eventually became the Berghof, Hitler's country retreat. The next stage of Hitler's plan involved the military for the first time. German troops reoccupied the demilitarized Rhineland on the 7th of March 1936, another breach of the Versailles Treaty. Hitler displayed the brinkmanship that was to take him to glory when, after German troops had crossed to the west of the Rhine, he was informed that French troops were on the border. He told his generals the German troops would stay unless the French made a move. They did not. These actions pleased many Germans, and with stability restored, the endless trouble seemingly over, Hitler stood high in their estimation. He had reduced unemployment from 6 million to 1 million. Foreign capital was being invested in Germany, despite knowledge of what was happening beneath the propaganda lies. Hitler continued to show two faces. On the one hand, the leadership was keen to emphasize its caring side. The Labour Front organized affordable holidays and travel for workers, whilst behind the scenes, Hitler and his fellow Nazi leaders were preparing to use the people they purported to look after for their true role in Hitler's state, as warriors for his megalomania. As the majority of Germans enjoyed the quiet years until 1939, under Heinrich Himmler, the SS and Gestapo increased their stranglehold on the population. The SS grew into a gigantic organization, filled with those who were the ideological pinnacle of German Nazism, using violence and suppression to form the society Hitler wanted. Eventually, the rest of Europe would be subjected to the same terror. Young people were the lifeblood of the Thousand-Year Reich, and Hitler bound them into his ideology from an early age. Their enthusiasm for ideals was ruthlessly exploited. The Hitler Youth for Boys and the Association of German Girls was militarized and prepared the young for the task ahead, the push for Lebensraum. More babies were needed to fill the new Lebensraum, so family planning clinics were closed. In mass rallies with the youth of Germany, it was impressed upon them that their duty was the community, the common good. The individual existed only in its duty to serve that community. The young were his race of superior beings who would bring about his new world. A world that was rooted in the mythical past, symbolized by the blood banner, from which power was supposed to flow before the other flags. The signs of this Hitler fantasy world were easily found. The dangerous manifestations of a man unable to deal with the natural world, and therefore determined to bend it to something he could understand and subdue.
Did you stop?
As unchallenged creator of this world, he could travel in style, giving his simple speeches, always fated, opinionated, his distorted fantasies presented with no limits set. Berlin held little of interest for him, and he was seldom there. He preferred the easy life of the traveling hero to the onerous duties of Chancellor. Hitler seemed to be everywhere, proclaiming his only mission in life was peace. The Olympic Games of 1936 were intended to prove the superiority of the new Nazi way. Although terror and rearmament were walking hand in hand, and the rest of the world believed this to be so, Germany was presented as a place of contentment, at ease with itself and its neighbors. Hitler's new life was the stuff of his dreams, forged in poverty in Vienna. Now he was able to indulge in the good things that money could provide.
I wasn't doing that before, so now it's doing
that. Architecture was one of his pleasures, and Albert Speer was one of many architects who would be presented with sketches of his ideas to rebuild German towns. Speer was responsible for the new chancellery. In the monumental style that Hitler favored, it took a mere 9 months to build. Yet not one single cabinet meeting ever took place in the new building. Speer, it has been said, was everything that Hitler wanted to be, and the Führer identified with his clever and sophisticated architect, never losing his regard for him. In July 1936, Hitler sent planes and troops to help Franco in the Spanish Civil War. This was to be the first test of the fighting ability of his men. By September, Hitler had given his permission to form the Germans into the Condor Legion. Against Goering's initial opposition, Hitler wanted the Luftwaffe to play their part in the war, and it was in Spain that the Bf-109 proved its worth in the hands of pilots such as Werner Mulders and Adolf Galland. Tanks were sent, as was the 88mm anti-aircraft gun that was used to devastating effect during World War II. Although there was international public condemnation following the bombing of Guernica on the 26th of April 1937, no one seemed to hear the alarm bells ringing, or see the contradictions between Hitler's public expressions and the actions he took, and if they did hear, they turned away. Hitler's brinkmanship was bringing him ever further along the path to his ultimate goal. Hitler was pleased with the war in Spain, and had ordered 3 major military operations there by the time it finished in 1939. He was able to help Mussolini in Spain, and so ease Italy into a closer alliance with Nazi Germany, whilst keeping Britain and France in conflict with Italy. A victory for Franco would mean another fascist state on France's borders. With the help of Hitler and Mussolini, Franco won his dictatorship. The war also found Hitler in indirect confrontation with his future adversary Stalin, as the communist leader sent technical and military help to the Republicans. Britain and France imposed an arms embargo, and this seriously hampered the Republican struggle. It was Hitler's first real indication of the reluctance of the Western powers to get involved in armed conflict. In 1938, Hitler commissioned a new car for his master race. The result was the people's car, the Volkswagen. This was one of the last peaceful contributions to German history before Hitler began to finalize his plans for what the years of power had been leading towards. The acquisition of land in the east, and therefore, inevitably, war. By February, he had abolished the Ministry of War and sacked 16 generals. From now on, he proclaimed, "I take personal command over the armed forces." Over 40 other generals resigned. Hitler had been brought up a Catholic, and although only nominally still a member when he died, he knew how to use Christianity to keep the churches and religious wing on his side. When addressing the Reichstag on March the 23rd, 1933, he had said, "The national government regards the two Christian confessions, meaning Catholicism and Protestantism, as factors essential to the soul of the German people. We hold the spiritual forces of Christianity to be indispensable elements in the moral elevation of most of the German people." How long Hitler would have tolerated religion is unclear, but it is doubtful that it would have had any place in his new world filled with the men and women of the master race.
Will trigger the reset process. That's it. Should we reset right here?
Whilst in Vienna, he had come across the writing of former monk Lance von Liebenfels, and his theories of the Aryan races as God-men, the development of blue-eyed blonde Aryans, the sterilization of what he termed lower races, and the incineration of the Jews. In Vienna, Hitler collected the works of Liebenfels, and the two men's views certainly corresponded greatly, but the connection embarrassed the Führer once he was in power, and he banned Liebenfels from publishing his writings.
How many people are using the FurbyQueen name now?
Liebenfels branded him as being from
This video I'm watching says FurbyQueen in the corner. So that's a different one. There's so many people using the same name.
Stating, "It seems to me that nothing would be more foolish than to re-establish the worship of Wotan. Our old mythology ceased to be viable when Christianity implanted itself. Nothing dies unless it is moribund."
I wonder how many
Yet
people
there
say
were
that about my
many ancient
videos.
German symbols visible during the many parades that Hitler watched.
That's funny.
And he was aware of the potent effect for propaganda of the symbolism associated with pagan gods and tales of heroism by powerful warriors. He wished to inspire in the modern Germans the same awe towards himself and the Nazi cause.
It should say good morning if it's now reset.
So that means it's not working if it hasn't been reset.
2005 Furby has been completely reset and has lost all of its memory data. So, it should
Europe had
act like
chosen to ignore
it came
the
out of the box.
warning Hitler had
Like it just
sent,
came out of the box.
and the Luftwaffe took part in the 1936 Spanish Civil War. Within Mein Kampf, he had written, "Man is a fighting animal. A nation, being a community of fighters, is a fighting unit. Any organism
That worked.
ceases to fight
She
is
said, "Good
doomed
morning."
to destruction." In 1938, another warning came. Austria was annexed without a shot being fired. The Austrians welcomed the move. The unification of the German people was one
Dang,
more step along
didn't
the
work.
road to eradicating the
was hoping it
humiliation
would have
of the
worked,
Versailles
but-
Treaty. Although Britain,
No such
France, and Italy raised their voices against the annexation, Hitler was allowed his triumphant entry into Austria following the invasion by the
That's
German
lovely.
army on the 12th of March. Hitler basked in the glory.
Okay, well, I think my next thing will be to try brand new batteries and see if that helps. Because it could be that the batteries are dying. So let's try brand new batteries. Oh my gosh.